Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Tonight, I've got over an hour of real life Reddit stories to keep you company. It's a good mix of drama, revenge, and random interesting situations people go through. And while you listen, I'll be sharing some hardcore gameplay I got today, where I go on an adventure with my friend. And I'll be sharing his gameplay from when we beat the dragon too. Also, I try to post these videos daily, so whenever you need something to relax or to fall asleep to, feel free to drop a sub and check out the channel. But anyways, let's get started with the video. This first story is about a chef who got tired of his overly macho coworker's weird prank and decided to end it with one bold, unexpected move. Back when I worked in a restaurant kitchen, we had this sous chef who was the definition of overly macho. You know the type. Loud, always trying to be funny, constantly showing off how manly he was. He had this obnoxious little habit that everyone absolutely hated. Whenever someone was quietly chopping vegetables or focused on prepping food, he'd sneak up behind them, yell something like, "Woohoo," and pretend he was about to poke them in the backside through their pants. It was immature, weird, and honestly just made everyone uncomfortable. Nobody liked it, but for some reason, nobody called him out either. The kitchen culture was fast-paced and rough around the edges, so people usually just rolled their eyes or tried to laugh it off. But deep down, we all dreaded hearing that loud woohoo sound. I'd seen him do it to everyone. New hires, seasoned cooks, even one of the dishwashers. He thought it was hilarious. Everyone else thought it was exhausting. And the thing was, he never seemed to learn. It didn't matter how many eye rolls or awkward silences followed. He just kept doing it. Now, I'm not someone who likes to start drama, but there's only so much weird workplace behavior a person can tolerate. One day, I was in the middle of prepping ingredients before the dinner rush. The kitchen was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of knives hitting cutting boards. I was zoned in, slicing peppers, when I suddenly got that feeling, that weird sixth sense that someone was behind me. I didn't even need to turn around to know it was him. The air got tense for a second, like the calm before a storm. And right on cue, I heard that familiar woohoo echo through the kitchen, but this time I was ready. Right as he came in close, I dropped my knife safely on the counter, spun around fast, grabbed him by the back of the neck, and planted a big, exaggerated kiss right on his mouth. I didn't even hesitate. The entire kitchen froze. For a second, he just stood there, eyes wide, completely stunned. Everyone else just stopped what they were doing and stared. You could hear the oven fan humming in the background. That's how silent it got. Then I stepped back and said loudly and confidently, "Bro, you just kissed a dude. What now?" The look on his face was priceless. His tough guy confidence completely evaporated. His mouth dropped open, his eyes were darting around like he couldn't believe what just happened. The room stayed dead quiet for a few seconds, and then someone in the back started laughing. Just this uncontrollable, wheezing laugh that broke the tension completely. After that, everyone was cracking up. Meanwhile, the sous chef was still frozen, probably trying to figure out what just happened to his sense of dominance. He didn't say a word. He just awkwardly turned around, wiped his face with a towel, and walked out of the kitchen for a bit. When he came back, he didn't bring it up. Not one word. And you know what? He never pulled that prank on anyone ever again. Not once. The rest of the crew thought it was legendary. For weeks, people were still chuckling about it during prep time. Someone even joked that it was the only way to defeat him. I didn't plan it that way. It just kind of happened. But looking back, it was exactly what the situation needed. To be clear, I'm a straight guy. Always have been. But that moment wasn't about that at all. It was about showing him how ridiculous and invasive his behavior was. If he was going to cross personal boundaries, then I was going to flip the script and make him feel what it was like to have his space invaded. After that day, he calmed down a lot in general. He was still loud and macho, but that weird prank disappeared forever. The kitchen actually felt more relaxed after that. Everyone could finally prep without worrying about a surprise woohoo ambush. And for me, it became one of my all-time favorite stories to tell. Anytime someone brings up awkward work moments or pranks gone wrong, I just smile and say, "Well, I did kiss a dude once," and watch the confusion spread before explaining what happened. Sometimes you really do have to take one for the team. In this case, quite literally. But it worked. And I'll admit, it's still one of the most satisfying wins I've ever had in a workplace setting. That's where this story finishes. That's such a perfect example of matching energy in the funniest way possible. He got hit with his own behavior in a way he never saw coming. What makes it so great is that it wasn't mean or aggressive, just clever and unexpected. Sometimes that kind of humor is the only thing that actually gets through to people like that. This next story is about someone whose service dog tried to warn them about an oncoming medical episode, but they didn't listen and quickly learned why they always should. I've had my service dog for almost 5 years now. He's not just a pet, he's basically my lifeline. I have a heart condition and seizures, and he's been trained to alert me when either of those are about to happen. He can sense changes before I even feel them. Usually, when something's coming on, he gives me a very specific alert. If I'm standing, he'll hop toward me, never on me, just close enough to get my attention. If I ignore that and things start escalating, he'll actually bring me down to the ground so I don't collapse and hurt myself. We've built this rhythm together over the years, a kind of trust where I know he's watching over me, and he knows I'll listen when he gives me that signal. At least that's how it usually goes. Earlier today, we were both kind of bored, so I decided to run through some of his basic training. Stuff like sit, stay, lie down, fetch an object, and wait in place. He loves doing that kind of thing. It's like a mental workout for him. We hadn't practiced in a while, so I figured it'd be a nice way to burn off some energy and give him attention. Everything was fine at first. He was following commands perfectly. Sharp, focused, tail wagging, ears perked up like always. But then, out of nowhere, he stopped listening. I told him to sit, and instead he started hopping in front of me. At first, I laughed. He looked so goofy, like he was just getting extra excited for treats. I thought, oh, someone's feeling playful today. He hopped again. Same movement, light bounce in front of me, eyes fixed on mine. I gave him the sit command again, but he ignored it completely. No hesitation, no waiting for a treat. Just another hop. Now, this wasn't the first time he'd been distracted during training. Sometimes if there's a noise outside or someone walks by the window, he'll get a little off track. So I figured that's all it was. I repeated the command, raised my hand the way I always do for visual reinforcement, and even held up one of his favorite treats. Still nothing. Just another hop. I started feeling a little confused, even a bit annoyed. He's usually so focused during training. I thought maybe he just wanted to skip the obedience part and go straight to the rewards. But then, he did it again. The exact same movement, hop and stare. And something about it was off. It wasn't playful anymore. It was sharper, more deliberate. Before I could fully process it, he lunged toward me, not in a harmful way, but with enough force to knock me off balance. Next thing I knew, I was on the floor. He immediately laid across my chest, pressing his weight down, staying completely still. His breathing was steady, but he was watching me closely, his ears back, his head resting against my shoulder. And that's when it clicked. He wasn't misbehaving. He wasn't ignoring me. He was alerting me. He'd been trying to tell me something was wrong the entire time, and I completely missed it. As he pressed against me, I started to realize what was happening. My heartbeat had been faster than normal, and I was feeling a little lightheaded. My blood pressure must have been dropping. The pressure from his body helped stabilize it, lowering my heart rate and keeping me grounded until things leveled out. It only took a minute or two before I felt okay again, but that moment hit me hard. My dog had been doing his job exactly right, and I had brushed him off like he was just acting silly. When I finally caught my breath, I looked at him and said, "Oh, you were alerting me." He just looked back at me like, yeah, genius I was. That expression, so calm, so patient, it made me laugh a little, even though I felt guilty. After everything settled down, I gave him a ton of treats and apologized over and over. He didn't care, of course. He was just happy that I was okay. But in that moment, I remembered something I learned the very first day I started working with him. The dog is always right. That's what they tell you during service dog training. The dog knows before you do. You might think you're fine, but they're trained to pick up on changes in your body. The subtle shifts in scent, breathing, heart rate, or posture that you can't consciously detect. And when they give you a signal, you listen. Always. It's easy to forget that sometimes, especially when things have been going smoothly for months. When you start feeling normal, you stop expecting problems. But your service dog never stops paying attention. Looking back, I realize how lucky I am that he didn't give up on me when I ignored him the first few times. He just kept trying until I had no choice but to listen. That's real loyalty. That's the kind of bond that's hard to explain unless you've lived it. So yeah, lesson relearned the hard way. Trust the dog. Always trust the dog. That's the end of this story. That's honestly incredible. It's wild how in tune service dogs are with their owners. Like they just know what's happening before it even starts. The way he stayed calm and did his job perfectly says everything about how much trust they build together. It's a reminder that sometimes instincts, especially from animals, are a lot smarter than logic. This next story is about a power-hungry officer who hoarded the only air-conditioned van during a brutal desert deployment until a very public cleaning exposed him and flipped the whole chain of command. I was deployed overseas for a year in a hot, dry stretch of desert where the wind tasted like a hairdryer and the dust got into everything. People told us the worst part of the tour would be boredom. For my section, though, that prediction lasted about 5 minutes. We had an officer in command, our OIC, who loved the sound of his own bullet points more than he loved listening to the people actually doing the work. From day one, his whole agenda felt like padding an evaluation. To give you a sense of the structure, our platoon was part of a section, inside a company, inside a division. Normal stuff. The part that wasn't normal was how our OIC would pick a task, set a random deadline, ignore our input, then chew us out when reality didn't obey his timeline. One time he assigned task A and gave us 2 weeks. We told him calmly that with our manpower and ongoing workload, we'd need 4. He waved it off like we were making excuses. 2 weeks, period. We finished it, not because his deadline made sense, but because we were stubborn and resourceful. We pulled around-the-clock rotations, basically living in 18-hour workdays for 3 straight weeks. No mission-critical lives on the line. No emergency. It was all for a line on his report. When we finally turned it in, exhausted and running on fumes, he told us we'd been dragging and that our pace was unacceptable. That rhythm became our life for the first half of the tour. Build a site, tear it down, move, set up again, repeat. We did it in the heat that pinned you to the ground, 120, 130 degrees, wearing full Kevlar, running tools, pounding grounding stakes into rock-hard soil. We moved gear in non-air-conditioned Humvees that felt like ovens with wheels. Heat injuries became a routine risk. Meanwhile, our OIC gave speeches about efficiency from an air-conditioned office. At first it was frustrating, then it turned surreal. The story changed when a new task came down. Clean our section's van. We all need to do our part. My entire section basically said the same sentence at the same time. We've had a van? It turned out that, yes, our section had an assigned van with crisp, glorious AC, and our OIC had quietly commandeered it for months because he didn't want to walk the half-mile to the DFAC, that's the dining facility, and get sweaty in the process. While we were riding in rolling kilns, he'd been cruising in cold comfort. It only came to light because someone higher up needed the van to get to the airfield. Suddenly, the van existed again, but it was dirty, and we all needed to do our part to clean it. You could taste the irony in the air. My section's temperature went up 10 degrees without the sun even moving. That's when my sergeant stepped up. I'll call him Sergeant Z. He was a bodybuilder, a calm storm of a leader, and he knew exactly how the whole platoon felt. Orders run down the chain, and he was the link above us. He faced us and said, "I'm not sending my troops to do a task handed down from an ivory tower." He called it unethical. He refused to pass the order. Instead, he said he and another sergeant would do it themselves. He took the van to the PX, the on-base store, grabbed Q-tips, trash bags, cleaning supplies, and his very loud JBL speaker. Then he parked the van directly in front of the division command tent. He cranked the official Army recruitment song at full volume and started detailing that van with Q-tips like it was a show car. The soundtrack bounced off canvas and aluminum, drifting over every walkway. People from the upper cadre kept stopping on their way in and out, eyebrows raised. Anyone who asked what was going on got the same plain answer from Sergeant Z. The OIC told us to clean his van because everyone needs to do their part. We're doing our part. And he'd go right back to scrubbing vents with a cotton swab. 4 hours later, the van looked brand new. The inside smelled like citrus and victory. He turned it back in and went on with his day. We thought that would be the end. A weird, funny morale boost in the middle of a punishing deployment, but the echo of that soundtrack carried farther than we expected. Word reached the DOIC, the Division OIC's boss. Apparently, some higher brass didn't appreciate the blast of music outside their tent, and a few noted that Sergeant Z had been needed elsewhere during those hours for technical help. The DOIC decided to find out what, exactly, had sparked a Q-tip cleaning concert at the front door of Division. That led to a town hall. In our unit, a town hall runs through the first sergeant, and it's where anyone can speak frankly without fear of blowback. Usually it's an hour of practical stuff. We need hot water, there's mold in a bay, boxes you can check and move on. This one took 5 hours. Once the first person started talking about the workload and the heat, the dam broke. We talked about the constant buildup / teardown cycles. We talked about the unrealistic timelines. We talked about the OIC never visiting the site, not once. We talked about heat injuries and the non-AC Humvees. And yes, we talked about the van. How it had existed privately all along. How our section had been told to clean it, because everyone needs to do their part. By the end, the first sergeant looked like a thundercloud. He was furious, not only at how we'd been handled, but that it had happened under his nose without him knowing the depth of it. He took everything we laid out to the DOIC. We were told there would be action. A week later, the change was impossible to miss. Our OIC stopped assigning anything. No tasks, no surprise deadlines, no grand plans for bullet points. For the remaining 4 months, we didn't hear a peep from him. Whenever we saw him, he looked like a dog that just got caught chewing the couch. Downcast, quiet, suddenly very interested in the background. He kept his position, probably because there was no immediate replacement, but his runway was gone. Here's the twist. The back half of deployment is usually a sprint for our section. There's gear to inventory, pallets to build, manifest to prep, checklist to double check. But compared to the first 6 months, it felt like a breeze. We had time to work methodically, hydrate, and actually take care of the equipment and ourselves. The pressure, the yelling, the dragging comments, all of it evaporated. Looking back, I still think about Sergeant Z, blasting the song, smiling as he explained the situation to every curious major and colonel who wandered by. He didn't scream. He didn't stage a scene just to spite someone. He followed the order to the letter, in a place where everyone could see the letter was the problem. That's what popped the bubble. Not drama, not mutiny. Just a stack of Q-tips, a speaker, and the truth, very publicly, very calmly, on display. The last months of that deployment felt like we could finally breathe. We did the work. We did it well. We didn't have to sprint for someone's bullet point, and every time I saw the van cruise by on an official run, AC humming, I couldn't help but grin. Everyone was now doing their part. For real. That's where the story ends. The quiet confidence from that sergeant carried the whole arc. No shouting match, just surgical compliance that showed the system the mirror. It's interesting how fast leadership pays attention once the noise reaches the right doorway. The best part is how the crew finally got space to work like professionals, instead of props for a checklist. That van moment is the kind of story people pass down because it teaches itself without a lecture. This next story is about someone who moved to the US and hilariously misunderstood what a baby shower actually was, taking the term way too literally. So I'm originally from Eastern Europe, and where I come from, we don't have this thing called a baby shower. I'd never even heard of it before. But after moving to the US, one of my close friends invited me to her cousin's baby shower. Now, when I first heard the words baby shower, I didn't think twice about it. I just kind of assumed it was exactly what it sounded like. A literal shower for a baby. In my head, I imagined this sweet little tradition where friends and family come together to bathe the newborn for the first time, maybe to symbolize a clean start or something wholesome like that. It sounded a little odd to me, but I figured, hey, different countries have different customs. The part that confused me, though, was why they'd invite so many people to something so personal. Like, who wants a crowd around while you're bathing a baby? But I didn't want to sound rude or uninformed, so I kept my questions to myself. A few days before the event, I went to buy a gift. I wanted to bring something thoughtful, something that fit the theme of the occasion. I stood in the baby aisle at the store, surrounded by bottles, pacifiers, and tiny clothes, trying to decide what was appropriate for a baby bath party, I guess. After a few minutes, I spotted the perfect thing. A cute little set of baby shower gel, baby shampoo, and lotion, all wrapped in pastel packaging with tiny ducks on it. I thought, perfect. It's literally a baby shower. You can't go wrong with shower gel for a baby. I was so proud of myself. I wrapped the gift neatly, wrote a little card that said something like, "Wishing your baby a fresh start in life," because that sounded poetic and clever to me, and showed up at the event feeling completely prepared. When I arrived, everything seemed pretty normal at first. The decorations were adorable. Balloons, pastel streamers, a big table full of snacks and cupcakes with baby-themed designs. Everyone was laughing, taking pictures, and chatting. But then I noticed something strange. There was no baby, just the mom-to-be, smiling and pregnant. At first I thought maybe the baby was upstairs sleeping or something. I even caught myself looking around, trying to figure out where they were hiding the little one. Then, during a conversation, I heard someone say, "She's due next month," and my brain completely froze. I just stood there like a computer that crashed mid-sentence. Wait, she's still pregnant? That's when it hit me. The baby shower wasn't about bathing a baby. It was about celebrating the upcoming birth, before the baby even arrived. I had completely misunderstood the entire concept. I felt my face heat up instantly. I glanced at the gift table, where my neatly wrapped present with baby shower gel was sitting proudly among a sea of diapers, baby clothes, and toys. It stuck out like a sore thumb. Everyone had brought practical, cute gifts, and I brought soap. A few people eventually opened gifts together, and when it came time for mine, the mom-to-be pulled it out, smiled politely, and said, "Oh, thank you. That's so thoughtful." But I could see her relatives exchanging little glances and grins, trying not to laugh. Later on, someone gently asked how I came up with the idea for the gift, and I told them the truth, that I thought baby shower literally meant people were going to bathe the baby. The whole room erupted in laughter, and honestly, I couldn't even be mad. It was funny. I laughed too, mostly because it was such an innocent mistake. The more they explained what a baby shower actually was, the games, the food, the gifts, the celebration of the upcoming birth, the more I realized just how far off my assumption had been. I went home after the party, sat on my couch, and just replayed everything in my head. I couldn't believe I had walked into a baby shower expecting there to be an actual baby, getting washed in a sink or a bathtub or something. Later that night, I looked up what a baby shower really is, just to make sure I didn't miss any other strange traditions. Sure enough, it's just a party to celebrate the upcoming arrival, to shower the mom-to-be with gifts. The word shower has nothing to do with soap or water. I felt like the human version of a 404 error. My friend texted me afterward, laughing about how her relatives couldn't stop joking about it. She told me not to worry. Everyone thought it was adorable and harmless. They said it made the day even more memorable. Still, every time I think about it, I can't help but cringe a little. Now I always double-check cultural traditions before showing up to anything, because apparently baby shower doesn't mean what I thought it did. And I learned that the hard way. That story wraps up here. That's such a funny and wholesome misunderstanding. You can tell it came from a genuine place, which makes it even better. Cultural mix-ups like that happen all the time, and they usually make for the best stories later on. Honestly, bringing actual shower gel to a baby shower might be the most literal and unintentionally perfect gift ever. This next story is about a lawyer who accidentally started dating his client's opponent's wife and ended up facing serious professional fallout because of it. So, it's been about 7 months since what I now refer to as the conference room incident, and people keep asking me how things turned out. In short, it's been a complete mess. About 3 weeks after I withdrew from my client Dave's case, I got called into a meeting with the senior partners at my firm. I walk into the conference room and there's a whole lineup waiting for me. 3 partners, our firm's general counsel, and a representative from our malpractice insurance carrier on a video call. That alone was enough to make my stomach drop. The managing partner slides a folder across the table and says, "Opposing counsel reported a conflict of interest issue to the State Bar under Rule 8.3. We've been notified of a disciplinary inquiry." My heart sank. I had already tried to do the right thing by withdrawing from the case once I realized the situation, but apparently that wasn't enough. Dave's new attorney had filed the report. They don't decide what happens. They just report potential violations, and then the bar takes over from there. But it was still a big deal. So there I was, explaining everything. How I met Sarah, how we'd been casually dating for a couple of months, how she used a different last name socially, and how my firm's conflict check never caught it because I had no idea who she really was. When you say it out loud, it sounds even worse. The general counsel was taking notes the entire time, stopping occasionally to ask questions like, "Walk me through your conflict check process," and "When did you first realize she was involved with the client?" I went through every step: the intake forms, the database, the fact that the names didn't match. Finally, he leans back in his chair and says, "This is a clear model rule 1.7a, 2 issue. Material limitation conflict." He was right. I was in a situation that could have compromised my ability to represent my client fairly. "You were correct to withdraw under Rule 1.16, he said, "but we need to understand how this wasn't caught earlier." Then the malpractice carrier rep unmutes himself from the video call and adds, "We'll need to document this as a circumstance that could lead to a claim. It'll be noted when your policy comes up for renewal." In other words, this was officially on my record now. The firm decided to take action immediately. They mandated that I complete an 8-hour continuing legal education seminar on conflicts of interest before taking on any new clients. They even signed me up for one that same weekend, 8 o'clock in the morning, at a hotel conference center. So, Saturday rolls around, and I drag myself there, coffee in hand, trying to keep a low profile. There are maybe 20 other lawyers in the room, and to my horror, one of the instructors is Patricia, a divorce attorney I've gone up against in court a few times. From the look she gave me, I knew she'd already heard something. The first few hours were standard: rule reviews, case law, and ethics hypotheticals. But then, right before lunch, Patricia starts presenting case studies. She pulls up one called In re Johnson, a 2019 disciplinary case. I feel my stomach twist immediately. The summary on the projector reads, "Attorney representing a divorce client begins dating someone, later discovers she's the opposing party, withdraws after learning the truth." It was almost identical to my situation, down to the accidental overlap and the discovery at a settlement meeting. I wanted to melt into my chair. Patricia didn't say my name, but she definitely made eye contact when explaining it. During the lunch break, one of the other attorneys casually mentions that he'd heard of something like that happening recently at a firm in town. He didn't realize he was talking to the guy from the story. I just smiled and nodded, trying not to give myself away. By the end of the day, I passed the seminar exam, got my certificate, and brought it back to the firm. I figured that was the end of it, but a few weeks later, the state bar sent me an official letter. The disciplinary inquiry had been closed with a private caution, basically a formal warning that stays in their internal files but isn't public discipline. It could have been so much worse. Still, the damage was done. When my malpractice policy renewed in September, my premium went up 15%. The letter from the carrier cited a reported disciplinary circumstance as the reason. The firm also added a new policy specifically for me. For the next 6 months, all of my conflict checks had to be pre-cleared by the general counsel before I could take on any new clients. On top of that, they added a new section to our intake forms asking for nicknames and alternate names. It was their way of closing the loophole that caused my situation. But the hardest part wasn't the official stuff. It was the fact that people knew. Not everyone, but enough. The legal community isn't that big, and word gets around fast. I've been called the coffee shop lawyer twice now at local bar events, a reference to where Sarah and I met. I've had opposing counsel make sly comments like, "You've met the other party before, haven't you?" with that knowing smirk. Rumors spread fast and mutate even faster. I've heard versions of the story that say I got engaged to Sarah. Another version claims I didn't find out until trial. None of it's true, but it doesn't matter. Once something like that circulates, it sticks. Since all that happened, I haven't dated anyone. I deleted the apps back in March. Before that, I matched with someone who mentioned she was recently divorced. Out of pure paranoia, I immediately asked who her lawyer was. She unmatched instantly, which I can't even blame her for. At this point, I've learned my lesson the hard way. Always run a proper conflict check, and if you think there's even the slightest chance of overlap, ask questions. A simple, "What's your last name again?" would have saved me from months of headaches, a higher insurance bill, and a reputation that now comes with a punchline. If either Dave or Sarah ever happens to read this, I'm genuinely sorry. I really didn't know. That's the end of this story. It's kind of wild how one honest mistake can snowball into something that big. You can tell the guy really wasn't trying to be shady, just caught in a bad coincidence. What makes it rough is how fast gossip spreads once it leaves your control. Still, it sounds like he handled it with accountability. which is more than most people would do. This next story is about a coworker who took being sensitive to smells way too far, to the point of policing other people's hygiene, and it all came to a head over something as basic as washing hands. So in my office, there's this one coworker who claims she's extremely sensitive to smells, like not just perfume or cologne, any smell at all. Because of her, our workplace has become what management calls a scent-free zone. That means no perfumes, no scented lotion, and technically no deodorant either. If she smells anything that's not completely neutral, she complains to the boss, and then we all get a company-wide reminder about the scent policy. Most of us just roll our eyes and move on, because it's been this way for a while. We've all adjusted to it as best as we can, even if it's a little ridiculous sometimes. But lately, she's been on a new level of annoying. For the past few weeks, she's been insisting that she can smell perfume again. She's been telling everyone she's having headaches or nausea from it, and she's convinced someone is secretly breaking the rules. Every day, it's the same thing. She storms into the office, sniffs around like she's hunting for evidence, and then complains to management. And management, instead of dealing with her directly, sends another friendly reminder email about respecting scent sensitivities. It's gotten to the point where we get those emails almost daily, and everyone's just exhausted. Then this past week, she took things to a new extreme. 2 or 3 times a week, she's been doing what I can only describe as desk inspections. She'll literally walk up and down the aisles, lean her head over each person's workspace, and take a deep sniff, loudly, like she's doing a smell test. If she thinks she catches a whiff of anything, she'll stand there sniffing the air like a bloodhound before moving on to the next person. It's uncomfortable, it's invasive, and it's honestly weird. Anyway, on Friday, she decided to do it again. The timing couldn't have been worse because I had just come back from the bathroom. I was sitting at my desk, minding my own business, when she stopped beside me and leaned in for her little inspection. Immediately, she recoiled like she'd smelled something horrible. Her face scrunched up and she loudly announced to everyone nearby that I was the one who'd been wearing perfume. The whole office went quiet for a second. People started looking over their cubicle walls to see what was happening. I told her flat out that I wasn't wearing anything scented. She didn't believe me. She started insisting that I must be lying, saying she could clearly smell perfume and that it was giving her a headache. It turned into this weird, tense moment where she was practically interrogating me about what products I used. Eventually, someone else stepped in and tried to calm her down. After a few minutes of back and forth, we figured out what she was actually smelling. The hand soap from the bathroom. Yeah, the smell wasn't perfume. It was soap, the kind the company provides straight from the dispenser in the restroom. Apparently, the mild citrus scent was what had been triggering her complaints for weeks. At that point, I was done. I'd been polite about this whole no scent thing for months, but now she was disrupting people's work and accusing me of breaking rules for literally washing my hands. So I looked at her and said, as calmly as I could, hand washing with soap is a non-negotiable hygiene practice. I'm not going to stop doing it. You can't reasonably expect me to avoid washing my hands just because you don't like the smell. She started sputtering, saying I was being disrespectful and that I could use water only or bring my own unscented soap from home. I told her that was ridiculous. I'm using company-provided soap in a company bathroom, and I'm not the one being unreasonable here. Then I just turned back to my work and ignored her. She stormed off, muttering something about reporting me to management. I wasn't rude, but I made it clear that I wasn't going to cater to her imaginary rules anymore. The funny part is, our boss wasn't even in on Friday, so she didn't have anyone to complain to right away. But I know how this goes. Tomorrow morning, she's probably going to have already sent a long email about fragrance exposure and unsafe work conditions. I'm expecting a meeting, maybe even a lecture from management about respecting sensitivities. But honestly, I don't think I did anything wrong. Washing your hands is literally hygiene 101. If the soap in the company bathroom bothers her that much, then that's something management needs to deal with, not me. I'm not about to walk around with unwashed hands just to make her happy. So now I'm just waiting for Monday to see what happens. If there's a meeting, fine. I'll just tell them exactly what happened. I washed my hands. If that's against company policy now, then we've got a bigger problem than scented soap. That's where this story ends. Some people really take workplace policies to extremes. Like, There's a difference between being considerate and being completely unreasonable. You can't go around sniffing coworkers like you're running customs at an airport. The whole thing is kind of funny, but also, it's a good reminder that some folks just love having something to complain about. If this ever turned into an HR issue, I'd love to be the fly on that wall. This next story is about a driver who got some hilarious petty revenge on a guy who constantly blocked parking spaces, all thanks to a clever setup involving a second car. So there's this small public parking area right in front of my flat. It's nothing fancy, just a single line of perpendicular parking spaces with a short stretch of road behind it so people can drive in and out. The last spot on the row is a bit awkward, kind of tucked into the corner. Because of that, you need that open space behind you to actually pull in or back out without scraping the wall or someone's bumper. Now, as with every parking lot in existence, there's always that one person who thinks rules don't apply to them. In our case, it was a guy who constantly parked his car right behind that last parking space, the one that needed the most room to move. He'd just stop there, cut off everyone else, and leave his car like he owned the place. People hated it. I'd seen folks pull up, realize they were blocked in, and then just give up entirely. One guy even called a taxi and left his car there because he didn't want to deal with the hassle. It became this regular thing. Everyone in the building knew about that guy. He was predictable, careless, and honestly just inconsiderate. One day, I came home and had no choice but to park in that last spot. It was late, parking was full, and I figured I'd risk it. I told myself, maybe tonight he won't show up. But of course, after a little while, he did. He came rolling up, same car, same smug parking job right behind me, completely blocking me in. Except this time, I saw him do it, and I had an idea. My wife had her car parked a few blocks away, so I grabbed her keys, got in her car, and drove it back to our street. Then, very slowly and very precisely, I parked her car right behind his. So now, it was a full chain of chaos. His car was blocking mine, and my wife's car was blocking his. Then came step 2. I called the police. Here in Malta, that's actually a pretty common thing to do. If someone's blocking you in, you can call the police, give them the car's registration number, and they'll call the owner to tell them to move it before issuing a fine. So I made the call and said, "Hey, there's a car blocking mine. Can you contact the owner so he can move it as soon as possible?" They said they'd handle it, and I sat back in my flat, peeking out the window like it was a live comedy show. About 20 minutes later, I saw him come storming down the street. He looked furious, waving his phone, muttering to himself. I could practically feel the anger radiating off him. He got to his car, realized he was blocked in by another one, my wife's, and his expression was priceless. It went from frustration to disbelief in about 3 seconds. He tried to move his car anyway, but obviously there was nowhere to go. That's when I decided to make my grand entrance. I walked out casually and said, "Hey man, you're blocking me in again." He snapped, "You called the police on me?" I said, "Well, yeah, you're blocking my car." Again. He started yelling about how I should have just waited, that he was only there for a minute, which is what every bad parker says when they get caught. I just shrugged and told him that if he didn't move, the police were on their way. Then, just to make things even funnier, I called the police again, this time saying, "The driver's here, but he's refusing to move his car." A few minutes later, I heard him calling the police himself, trying to complain about me, saying he was trapped by my car now. So there we were, both technically breaking a rule, but one of us doing it for justice. When the officers arrived, it was like a sitcom finale. They pulled up, saw the whole scene, and started laughing immediately. One officer looked at me and said, "You're the one who made the first call, right?" I nodded. They turned to the other guy and said, "You can't park behind cars like this. You're getting fined." He started arguing, pointing at my wife's car, shouting about how I trapped him. Then, right on cue, one of the officers called the number registered to my wife's car to ask the owner to move it. My phone started ringing in my pocket. I answered and said, "Yeah, that's me. I'm right here." Both officers burst out laughing. One of them literally had to turn around to hide his smile. Meanwhile, the guy looked like he was about to explode. In the end, we both technically got fined. Me for parking illegally with my wife's car, and him for blocking the exit. My fine was 23 euros. His was a lot more. But honestly, that 23 euros was the best money I've ever spent, worth every single cent. The officers were still chuckling when they left, and the guy stormed off muttering something about unfairness. But the best part, He never parked there again. Ever since that day, that corner spot has stayed open and peaceful. No more blocked cars, no more frustration, just calm parking like it should be. Looking back on it now, it was the perfect kind of petty revenge. Not too harsh, not too far, but just enough to make the point. And I can't lie, it still makes me laugh whenever I drive past that spot and remember his face. That story ends there. That's honestly the perfect mix of petty and satisfying. The timing, the setup, everything, it couldn't have gone better. Some people only learn when they face a little embarrassment, and that guy definitely got his wake-up call. It's kind of funny how the calmest revenge stories end up being the most memorable. This next story is about a neighbor who wouldn't stop blasting music in the middle of the night until the storyteller decided to give him a taste of his own sleepless routine. I live in a duplex, basically 2 homes sharing a wall, and for the most part it's been fine. The guy next door works night shifts, so I tried to be patient about his weird hours. But what started as the occasional late night noise turned into a full-on nightly concert at 2 or 3 in the morning. He loved blasting electronic dance music, like he was hosting an after-hours rave in his living room. Heavy bass, constant thumping, and lights flickering through the windows. The whole deal. It wasn't every once in a while either. It was constant, every single night. At first I told myself to just deal with it. He probably didn't realize how loud it was through the walls. So one morning, when he was out front getting in his car, I brought it up politely. I said something like, "Hey man, I know you work nights, but the music's been pretty loud lately. It's keeping me up." He smiled, nodded, said, "Yeah man, sorry about that." And that was it. I thought, okay, maybe that'll fix it. That night, 2:30 rolls around. I'm half asleep when I hear it again. That deep, repetitive bass shaking my wall. I lay there staring at the ceiling, telling myself to stay calm. He said he'd stop. Maybe he just forgot. But the next night, it happened again. And again after that. By the end of that week, I was running on fumes. You know that foggy, half-awake state where your brain feels like it's underwater? That was me. I could barely focus at work. I was snapping at little things, and even coffee wasn't helping. The final straw came after 3 nights in a row of almost no sleep. I had an early morning meeting I couldn't miss, and at 3 a.m., his music started blasting again. I just sat up in bed, exhausted and done. There's something about being that tired that makes you think clearer, not angrier. I decided if he wanted to treat this like a club, I'd treat it like one too, but on my schedule. So the next morning, around 8 a.m., when I heard him finally turning off the music and settling down, I started my plan. I dragged my old stereo speakers out of the closet, wiped off the dust, and set them up against our shared wall. Then I grabbed my laptop and found the most obnoxious sound I could think of, a 10-hour video of babies crying on full blast. I cranked the volume all the way up and hit play. The sound filled my apartment instantly. High-pitched wails, non-stop crying, echoing through the wall like chaos itself. It was awful, but also kind of perfect. I sat down on my couch with a cup of coffee and waited. About 15 minutes later, there was a loud knock at my door. I opened it, and there he was, shirtless, hair sticking up in every direction, eyes half open like he'd just been dragged out of a nightmare. He looked absolutely miserable. He goes, "Have you lost your mind?" I just smiled, took a sip of my coffee, and said, "No, just lost some sleep." Then I shut the door. The best part? He didn't even try to argue. I could hear him walking back down the steps, probably realizing how it felt to be woken up by a ridiculous noise. I left the crying on for another 10 minutes just to make the point, then turned it off. Since then, the nights have been completely silent. No more late-night EDM concerts, no more shaking walls, no more 3 a.m. parties. It's been peaceful. Looking back, I probably could have gone in through the landlord or filed a noise complaint, but honestly, this was faster and way more satisfying. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. He got to understand what he'd been putting me through without me having to say another word. It's funny how some people only learn empathy when they experience the same inconvenience themselves. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to argue, didn't even need to make threats. Just a few crying babies and a good cup of coffee did the job. I'm not saying I recommend it as a universal solution, but for this one, it worked perfectly. My wall's been quiet, I've been sleeping better, and the world feels right again. That story wraps up here. That's such a clean way to handle it. No drama, just pure poetic timing. It's kind of amazing how fast people adjust once they feel their own noise bouncing back at them. I like that it wasn't destructive or mean, just clever and fair. Sometimes the calmest response ends up being the most effective. This next story is about a new employee who got tired of a bragging coworker constantly comparing their company to his old one, and finally shut him down with one perfect line. When I first started working at this well-known biotech company, I was still in that new hire phase. Learning names, figuring out the layout, and trying not to sound clueless in every meeting. My team seemed friendly, and the vibe was decent overall. We were a mixed bunch of researchers, analysts, and lab techs, all sitting together in the cafeteria one afternoon for lunch. It was one of those casual moments where everyone's chatting, getting to know each other better. At some point, someone asked me about my old job, since I'd come from another biotech competitor. I gave a short answer, just explaining that the company had a rough reputation, but I'd learned a lot while I was there. I didn't go into much detail, I was just trying to make small talk. That's when this guy across the table jumped in. He'd started about 3 months before I did, so he still had that I'm new but pretending I'm not new energy. From the moment I joined, I'd noticed he liked to dominate conversations. He was one of those people who talks like they've been there for years, even when everyone knows they haven't. He leans forward, points his fork like he's about to deliver a TED talk, and goes, "Man, this company's benefits are terrible compared to my last place." Everyone kind of glanced at each other because it wasn't the kind of thing people normally say out loud in a shared lunchroom. But he didn't stop there. He started listing all the amazing things his previous employer supposedly offered: free catering, full health coverage, sabbatical programs, yearly bonuses, gym memberships, and real career growth opportunities. The list kept going, and the more he talked, the more exaggerated it sounded. I remember one of my coworkers quietly muttering under their breath, "Then why'd you leave?" But he either didn't hear it or ignored it. He kept going on and on, saying things like, "It's crazy that a multi-million-dollar company like this can't even match half of what my old job had." The thing is, nobody had asked for a comparison. We were just trying to have a normal lunch. You could tell the rest of the table was checked out. People were looking at their phones, taking long sips of water, anything to avoid eye contact. But he was in his own world, complaining like he was on some sort of corporate talk show. Now, normally, I'm pretty patient. I don't like to start conflicts, especially not at work. But after listening to him tear into the company I had literally just joined, and seeing how everyone else looked annoyed, I couldn't help myself. When he paused to take a bite, I looked at him and said, as casually as possible, "Then you must have done something pretty crazy to lose all those benefits and end up here." The table went silent. You could hear the hum of the cafeteria fridge in the background. One of my coworkers nearly choked on their drink trying not to laugh. He froze mid-bite, and the look on his face was priceless. That mix of shock and offense that people get when they realize they just walked straight into a punchline. He didn't say anything right away, just stared at me for a few seconds. Then, without responding, he turned back to his food and finished eating in silence. The rest of us moved on like nothing happened. We started talking about movies, weekend plans, and random stuff. But that one comment must have hit him harder than I expected, because from that day forward, he never brought up his old job again. In fact, he barely talked to me after that at all. I could feel that he didn't like me. You know that weird tension when someone goes out of their way not to make eye contact? Yeah, that, but strangely enough, it made me closer with the rest of the team. A couple of them came by my desk later that day just to say, "That line at lunch was perfect." Apparently, everyone had been tired of his constant comparisons for weeks, but nobody wanted to be the one to call him out. I just happened to be the one who finally said what everyone was thinking. After that day, the lunches got a lot more enjoyable. The team was more relaxed, and conversation actually flowed naturally again. That guy still tried to sound superior sometimes, but without the bragging about his old employer, it lost all its punch. Looking back, I didn't mean for it to be mean. It just slipped out at the right time. Sometimes all it takes is one quick line to get someone to finally realize how they sound. To be fair, he wasn't a bad worker. He just had that habit of turning every conversation into a story about himself. I think the whole situation humbled him a little, or at least made him more aware that not everyone wanted to hear his greatest hits of "my old job was better." After a few months, we all found a good rhythm as a team. He stayed quiet when it came to company perks, and the rest of us stayed focused on our work. And for me, that moment became one of those office memories that you quietly laugh about later when someone new joins and starts showing the same energy he used to have. Sometimes, all it takes is one well-placed comment to reset the tone. That story ends there. That comeback was sharp, but fair. It's funny how a single sentence can change the whole energy of a room like that. Some people just need that little verbal mirror held up to realize how they sound. Honestly, it's kind of satisfying when confidence meets the right amount of honesty. This next story is about a student who came home after a long day to find his roommate had ruined his dinner, so he decided to return the favor in the most fitting way possible. A few years ago, I decided to go back to school to switch careers. It was one of those choices that felt exciting at first, but the reality of student life hit hard once I started paying for everything again. To keep expenses low, I moved into a shared student apartment in the basement of an old building. It wasn't glamorous, but it was cheap, and that was enough. The setup was pretty simple: a long, narrow hallway with locked bedrooms for each of us, and a shared kitchen and bathrooms at one end. We weren't exactly a friendly bunch. No one really hung out or tried to bond. The most communication that ever happened was a group chat reminder to e-transfer money for the Wi-Fi. It was one of those quiet living situations where everyone just existed in parallel. One night, after a long day of classes and an evening shift at work, I came home exhausted. It was close to 10 at night, and all I wanted was something warm to eat. Cash was tight back then, so whenever I could afford something even slightly fun, it felt like a luxury. That night, I decided to make myself a frozen pizza, my guilty pleasure. I set the oven to about 375, unwrapped the pizza, and slid it in. The oven was old, one of those that always made a big metallic groan when you opened or closed the door. I set a timer on my phone for 25 minutes, the exact time the box recommended, and went back to my room to scroll aimlessly and unwind. About 10 or 12 minutes later, I heard that familiar sound, the oven door creaking open, then shutting again. It was distinct enough that I could tell exactly what had happened. Then I heard one of the other doors down the hall close, followed by silence. I figured someone was just checking on their food, or maybe using the stove for a second. No big deal. When the timer went off, I got up, stretched, and made my way to the kitchen. The smell hit me first. Not the warm, cheesy aroma I expected, but something sharp and overcooked. I opened the oven door and felt my stomach sink. My pizza was completely burnt. Not like a little crisp around the edges. I mean, blackened crust, cheese bubbling into ash, that awful smell of carbonized dough. Then I noticed something else. Sitting on the top rack was a huge tray of raw chicken breasts. Whoever had come in had shoved their food in with mine. And worse, they'd cranked the temperature up to 425. My pizza didn't stand a chance. I stood there in disbelief for a few seconds, just staring at the charred remains. I wanted to be calm about it. I really did. But when you're exhausted, hungry, and broke, even something small can feel personal. That pizza was supposed to be my one comfort after a long day, and now it was ruined because some inconsiderate roommate couldn't be bothered to ask or wait. I ate a slice anyway, just because I couldn't afford to waste it, but every bite tasted like burnt cardboard and frustration. I sat there chewing it in silence, staring at the wall, thinking about how pitiful my life felt in that moment. Just me, my burnt pizza, and the faint smell of someone else's chicken cooking in the background. After a few minutes, I got up, walked back into the kitchen, and stared at the oven again. The chicken was still in there, browning nicely. That's when I decided, fine, if this guy was going to raise the temperature without asking, I'd raise it too. So I turned the dial all the way up to 500. The oven hummed loudly, and I could feel the heat radiating out as I walked back to my room. I sat down on my bed, opened my laptop, and waited. About 15 minutes later, the smoke alarm went off, loud, shrill, and echoing through the hallway. I smiled to myself. Not long after, I heard shuffling, the sound of someone rushing out of their room, muttering, and then opening the oven door. The smell of burnt chicken quickly filled the air. I stepped out into the hallway, keeping my voice calm and just a little bit ominous. "Everything all good, bud?" I asked. He looked up, startled. He was half bent over, trying to scrape what used to be chicken breasts off a baking sheet. Smoke was still rising around him, and the air smelled awful. He stammered something like, yeah, it's fine," clearly embarrassed and irritated. I nodded, said nothing else, and walked back into my room. Then I sat down with what was left of my terrible pizza and ate it, somehow feeling a little better with every bite. It wasn't some grand revenge, but it was enough. He learned his lesson, or at least he never touched the oven when I was using it again. A few weeks later, I moved out anyway. The place was cheap, but the hassle wasn't worth it. Sometimes the smallest bits of payback bring the biggest peace of mind, especially when it involves someone else's overcooked dinner. That story stops there. That's such a simple but satisfying kind of revenge. Just calm, quiet, and perfectly deserved. People who mess with other people's food never realize how personal that feels until it happens to them. It's kind of poetic how the whole thing ended with burnt chicken, like the universe balancing it out. This next story is about a team whose new supervisor tried to tighten things up by only tracking phone calls, and the team decided to follow her rule a little too literally. A few months ago, something happened at my job that still makes me laugh when I think about it. I work in a department that handles all kinds of incoming requests, phone calls, emails, internal tickets, even print jobs that come through automatically. The system we had worked perfectly. Everyone just helped wherever they were needed, and the work balanced itself out. It wasn't fancy or complicated, but it worked. The best part was that our manager actually trusted us. Nobody micromanaged. Nobody tracked every second of what we did. We just got stuff done and kept the place running smoothly. It had been that way for decades, and everyone was happy. Then everything changed when one of my coworkers got promoted to supervisor. Let's just say it wasn't because of her performance. She got the job because she was best friends with our boss. And rumor had it, she also gave him relationship advice on the side. So yeah, not exactly a fair promotion. From the start, she came in acting like she was going to revolutionize the department. You know the type. Clipboards, spreadsheets, efficiency initiatives. It was clear she wanted to make her mark, even if that meant breaking a system that wasn't broken. Her big idea? She called us all together and said, "From now on, I'll be tracking everyone's phone calls for performance metrics. We need to make sure everyone's doing their job and no one's slacking." We all kind of stared at her for a second. Someone asked, "What about emails and tickets? Those take most of our time." She just shrugged and said, "Well, there's no way to measure those right now, so we can't really track them." We all exchanged glances. Okay, so phone calls were suddenly the only thing that mattered. Fine. If that's what she wanted, that's what she'd get. The next day, we put her policy into full effect. The phones were our top priority. Everything else could wait. If the phone rang, we dropped whatever we were doing. Working on an email? Pause it. Handling a complicated ticket? Put it aside. Printer jam? Not our problem unless it was calling us directly. At first it was kind of funny, but by the second day, the consequences started to show. The shared inbox was filling up fast. Unread emails piling one after another. Tickets sat untouched in the internal portal, and no one was clearing the printer queue, so paper was just stacking up beside it like a sad little snowbank. By the third day, other departments started noticing. People from different offices were emailing and calling, asking if we were backed up because no one had responded to anything in days. A few external customers even reached out, confused about why their requests hadn't been handled. One guy actually walked down to our office in person and said, "Hey, I sent an email a few days ago. Is everything okay over here?" We all gave him the same polite answer. Our supervisor told us to focus on phone calls since that's what matters. He blinked at us, nodded slowly, and left. A few hours later, I saw him talking to our boss. I could only imagine what that conversation sounded like. By the end of the week, the backlog was getting ridiculous. Our inbox looked like a digital graveyard, and people from every department were frustrated. But we kept following the rules, because technically we were doing exactly what our supervisor told us to do. Then one morning, she got called into a meeting with the boss. I was in the middle of answering a call when I saw her walk past. She looked nervous. The meeting lasted about an hour. When she finally came out, she looked furious. No eye contact, no small talk, just straight to her desk. A few minutes later, a message popped up in our Teams chat from her. "Please remember that all work types are important, not just phone calls." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just that one sentence. And just like that, her performance tracking policy disappeared forever. We went right back to our normal routine, balancing calls, emails, and tickets like we'd always done. The office felt peaceful again. The printers started working through their pile. The inbox was under control, and we were back to doing our jobs without anyone breathing down our necks. Looking back on it, the whole thing was kind of poetic. She wanted accountability, but all she managed to do was prove that the old system worked better than anything she came up with. It's funny how sometimes people come in wanting to fix things just to look productive, and all they really do is mess up what's already running fine. The best part? She never mentioned the word metrics again. Not once. We still joke about it whenever the phones start ringing nonstop. Someone will say, "Careful, those are the only calls that matter." And we all laugh. That story wraps up here. That's such classic workplace irony. Someone tries to make things more efficient and ends up proving why they should have left it alone. It's kind of satisfying when a bad policy collapses under its own logic like that. The team handled it perfectly though. Quiet, polite, and effective. Sometimes doing exactly what you're told is the best form of rebellion. This next story is about a neighbor who constantly complained about others parking near his house until one resident found a clever and satisfying way to give him a little taste of his own attitude. I cannot stand my neighbor. He's one of those people who just seems to make life difficult for everyone around him. Rude, entitled, and constantly irritated by the smallest things. If there's peace in the neighborhood, he'll find a way to ruin it. Now, on the opposite side of me, I have another neighbor who's actually great. We get along really well, and he's been having some excavation work done in his yard. Nothing major, just a quick 2-day project to fix some drainage issues. The construction crew dropped off their equipment on Sunday night, parking their truck and trailer, which was carrying a backhoe, on the street. It happened to be in front of the grumpy neighbor's house, but they parked legally, about 15 feet back from his driveway. It wasn't blocking anything. Most people would have shrugged it off as a temporary inconvenience, but I knew exactly how this was going to go down. This guy loses his mind if anyone parks in front of his house, even though it's a public street. He acts like the curb belongs to him personally, like there's an invisible fence marking his territory. The next morning, as expected, he came outside and immediately noticed the truck and trailer. I could see him from my window just standing there, arms crossed, glaring at it like it had insulted his entire family. He paced a little, muttered to himself, and went back inside. I thought maybe he'd let it go, but of course that was wishful thinking. The excavation crew showed up later that morning and got right to work. They were professional, efficient, and polite. I watched them from time to time while I did things around my house. Everything was going smoothly until late that afternoon, when my neighbor decided to make a scene. It was trash day eve, so he wheeled his bins down to the curb. Except instead of putting them in front of his house like normal people do, he placed them right up against the front of the crew's truck, so close that they couldn't pull forward without hitting them. He didn't even try to hide the fact that it was on purpose. You could practically see the satisfaction on his face as he positioned the cans just right. When he was done, he got into his car, backed out of his driveway, and slowed down near the workers. He rolled down his window and, in that loud, condescending tone he always uses, said something like, "When are you going to move that big ugly thing from in front of my house?" One of the workers wiped his hands on a rag and calmly replied, "We're finishing up now, sir." The neighbor gave a dismissive wave, muttered something under his breath, and drove off, clearly proud of himself for putting them in their place. I stood there for a second, watching the whole thing unfold, and decided that maybe it was time someone gave him a small taste of his own medicine. I walked over to the crew and said, "Hey, just so you know, those trash cans are placed so close to your truck that the garbage truck probably won't be able to reach them tomorrow. It would be terrible if the cuts they got skipped, right?" The guy closest to me paused for a second, then looked up with his slow, knowing grin. He nodded, and I just smiled back, said goodnight, and went back inside. As the evening went on, I kept peeking out the window now and then. The sun set, the street got quiet, and the equipment stayed right where it was. Truck, trailer, and backhoe, all sitting peacefully in front of my neighbor's house. A little later, I saw the neighbor come home. The headlights of his car swept across the equipment, and even from my window, I could tell he was fuming. He slammed his car door, stomped toward his trash cans, and just stood there glaring at them. The truck and trailer weren't going anywhere, and the look on his face said it all. By the time I turned in for the night, the street was still the same. The crew's truck was parked right where it had been all day, the bins were untouched, and the neighbor was stewing in his own frustration. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the garbage truck making its way down the street. I peeked out just in time to see it pass right by his house, skipping his cans entirely. The garbage arm couldn't reach past the equipment, and the crew, of course, didn't move it until later that afternoon. I can't describe the satisfaction I felt watching that happen. For once, he had to deal with the kind of petty annoyance he loved dishing out to everyone else. And the best part? It wasn't even mean-spirited. It was just a quiet little dose of karma delivered in the most natural way possible. By the end of the day, the workers had finished up, loaded their equipment, and drove off. The street was clear again, calm as ever. But my neighbor's trash cans? Still sitting there, full and untouched, like a little monument to poetic justice. That's where this story finishes. That's such a perfect example of letting karma do the work for you. It's funny how people who love control lose it the fastest when things don't go their way. The fact that it all happened naturally just makes it even better. There's something oddly satisfying about quiet payback that doesn't need any words at all. This next story is about someone who got roped into helping a friend fix their printer over Discord, something that quickly turned into a surprisingly funny tech support moment. The other night, I was just relaxing at home, chatting with friends on Discord. It was one of those casual evenings where nobody's really doing anything, just hanging out online, sharing stories, and killing time. Out of nowhere, one of my friends pops into the voice channel and says, in this half-joking, half-serious tone, hey, can you help me unjam a printer? Immediately, I groaned. Because, let's be real, nothing good ever starts with that sentence. Printer problems are the ultimate test of patience. So I jokingly said, I will literally end you for even asking that. And everyone in the call started laughing. We all know how this goes. Remote printer support is like trying to do brain surgery with oven mitts on. Still, I gave in. Partly because I'm that kind of person who can't resist a challenge, and partly because I knew this was going to be entertaining no matter what. My friend turns on their webcam so I can actually see what I'm dealing with. It's a Brother printer, already a bad sign because those things can be stubborn when they want to be. They tell me they were out of letter-size paper, so they fed it some legal paper instead, but forgot to change the print settings. The printer, being the greedy little machine it is, decided to take in 2 sheets at once. So now it's jammed tighter than a jar lid your grandma closed 3 days ago. I sighed and started giving directions like a remote tech support agent. Okay, check the back panel. Yeah, right there. Pull that tab up. No, not that one. The one next to it. To their credit, my friend wasn't totally clueless when it came to tech. They work with quantum computers for their job, which made this all the more ridiculous. Like, they literally deal with cutting-edge computing technology, but a printer jam? That's the final boss. They followed along while I looked up the printer's model number. I pulled up the online user manual in another window and started reading off the steps. Alright, it says to open the rear panel, check for any scraps of paper near the rollers, and gently pull them out. If it's still stuck, you'll need to pop off the back housing. After a bit of fiddling, and a few moments of me going, wait, show me the inside again. I think I see it. They finally got it. There was this loud click, and then the unmistakable sound of the printer resetting itself. The call went silent for a second, and then they just went, oh my god, it's printing. The whole Discord chat erupted with laughter. Someone yelled, mission accomplished, while another person started making printer sound effects into their mic. It felt like we had just completed a high-stakes operation. I leaned back in my chair, feeling way too proud of myself for fixing a printer through a webcam. There, I said, all done. And next time, maybe don't ask me to unjam your printer remotely, unless you want to see me lose my mind. We joked about it for the rest of the night. My friend promised to never make the same mistake again, though knowing them, it's only a matter of time before I get another urgent tech question. Still, I had to admit, there was something kind of impressive about the whole thing. The fact that it actually worked, that's a rare win in the world of remote troubleshooting. And honestly, I respect the audacity of anyone who thinks, yeah, maybe my friend can fix this printer jam through a computer screen. That story wraps up here. That's such a perfect mix of friendship and chaos. Helping someone fix a printer over Discord sounds impossible, but somehow it worked. What makes it funny is how casual it all was. Like it went from small talk to full-on tech support in seconds. Everyone needs that one friend who can handle a printer meltdown like a pro. This next story is about a hardworking mechanic who got in trouble at his job for doing too much, and decided to follow orders a little too literally. I work as a night shift mechanic for a fleet of municipal buses. The night shift is when most of the heavy work happens, since that's when the buses are out of service. It's quiet, kind of peaceful in its own way. Just me, the sound of tools, and the occasional hum of the maintenance bay fans echoing through the building. When I first started, I was the kind of person who always went the extra mile. I'd finish my assigned work orders early, then jump in to help whoever else needed a hand. If someone was struggling with a tricky repair or running behind schedule, I'd step in and lend my experience. I've been around long enough to know most of the common issues these buses have and how to fix them quickly. It wasn't about showing off or anything. I just liked keeping things running smoothly. If the fleet rolled out on time the next morning, I felt good about that. But a few weeks ago, I got called into the office. It was one of those meetings that immediately puts you on edge. The kind where management's tone tells you something's wrong before they even start talking. They sat me down and said, "You need to stop cheating with your work time. Stop helping people." At first I thought I misheard them. Cheating? Helping my coworkers was now cheating? They went on to tell me I was doing too much, that I should only focus on my own assigned tasks and not take any own initiatives. If I didn't stop, there would be consequences. I just sat there trying to process it. I've never been the kind of person who slacks off, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. But apparently, management didn't like that I was working beyond my official list. So fine. They didn't want me helping others? No problem. From that night on, I did exactly what they told me to do. No more, no less. I stopped checking in with other mechanics after finishing my work. If I wrapped up my assignments early, I'd clean up my area, clock out, and head home. And honestly, it didn't take long for the effects to show. Before, things ran smoothly. If someone fell behind or ran into a bigger repair, I'd step in and help get it done before morning. But now, I just stayed in my lane. And since a lot of the others relied on that little bit of teamwork we all shared, the workflow started to slow down noticeably. Every night, a few more buses would stay parked instead of being ready for the morning shift. Parts that I could have helped replace stayed on backorder longer because no one checked twice. Small problems grew into bigger ones because nobody caught them early. And the best part? Whenever someone from the office asked why a task wasn't done or why a bus wasn't ready, I just shrugged and said, "Sorry, I was told not to take any own initiatives. I'm not allowed to help. It's not even me trying to be petty. Just literally doing what I was told." My coworkers noticed too. At first they'd come over like usual, asking if I could lend a hand. But after I explained the situation, they just shook their heads and said things like, "Man, this place is getting ridiculous." To be honest, I'm on my way out anyway. I've already started looking for other jobs. It's not that I hate the work. I actually enjoy what I do. I like fixing things, keeping systems running, making sure everything's in shape for the next day. But when management starts punishing people for caring too much, that's when you know it's time to move on. The funny thing is, even though it's frustrating, I've noticed something unexpected. I feel a lot more rested now. Before, I'd stay late to finish extra repairs, double-check other people's work, or take on side tasks that weren't technically mine. I'd go home exhausted and wake up dreading the next night. Now, I do what's required, clock out, and that's it. No stress, no staying after hours, no thankless overtime. At first it felt weird not helping, like I was ignoring problems I could fix in 10 minutes. But after a while, I realized it's not my responsibility anymore. I was putting in extra energy for a place that didn't appreciate it. Sometimes you think you're helping by going above and beyond, but in the wrong workplace, it just makes people expect more from you without giving anything back. So now I just do the job I'm paid for. Nothing more, nothing less. I don't cut corners, but I don't go chasing problems that aren't mine either. And the results? Management got exactly what they asked for. Productivity dropped, deadlines slipped. Buses that used to be ready for service aren't anymore. And every time they ask me why, I give them the same line. I was told not to take any own initiatives. It's funny how fast things change when you stop doing the invisible work no one notices, until it's gone. I'm planning to leave soon anyway. Hopefully I'll find a new shop or garage where helping out and caring about the job isn't seen as a problem. Somewhere that still values effort and teamwork. Until then, I'll just keep doing exactly what they told me to do, and nothing else. That's where the story ends. That one's such a classic case of bad management getting in their own way. When people stop rewarding effort, they lose the people who actually care. It's kind of satisfying though. seeing how quickly the cracks show once the helpful guy stops stepping in. Sometimes the quiet ones doing the extra work really are the glue holding everything together. This next story is about a guy who tried to plan a romantic surprise for his girlfriend, but ended up scaring her half to death instead. My girlfriend and I had been dating for a little over a year, and she always talked about how much she loved surprises. She'd mention it casually, saying things like, "I love when people do something unexpected, it feels thoughtful." So I decided I'd do something cute for her. My idea was a surprise dinner date at her apartment, candles, music, her favorite food, the whole deal. The plan seemed simple enough. She'd get home from work, and I'd already be there waiting with everything set up. It sounded romantic in my head, like one of those moments you see in a movie where everything just works out perfectly. So, I got the spare keys she'd given me months ago for emergencies. I stopped by her favorite restaurant and picked up takeout. Then I grabbed some candles, flowers, and even a little Bluetooth speaker so I could play her favorite playlist in the background. When I got to her apartment, everything was quiet. I let myself in, started setting things up, and it actually looked really good. Candles glowing softly, lights dimmed, food plated nicely, music queued up. I remember standing back for a second thinking, yeah, this is gonna be great. Then I heard her keys at the door. My heart started racing, partly from excitement, partly from nerves. I quickly dimmed the lights even more, got behind the counter, and planned my big reveal. The idea was to jump out and say something sweet, maybe a cheesy "surprise, babe," or "welcome home, beautiful." The door opened. She stepped inside, and then she screamed, not like a startled little gasp, a full-on, blood-curdling scream that could have shattered glass. Before I could even say anything, she dropped her bag, grabbed the first thing she could find, which turned out to be a frying pan, and came charging at me. I had just enough time to duck as the pan whooshed past my head. I yelled out, "It's me! It's me!" There was this long, tense pause, maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. She froze, eyes wide, breathing hard. I was crouched halfway behind the counter like some kind of burglar who got caught, and then she just started crying. I rushed over, hands up, trying to calm her down. She yelled through tears, "What are you doing here?" I tried to explain that I wanted to surprise her with dinner, but that didn't help much. Apparently, from outside the window, she had seen the candlelight flickering and what looked like shadows moving around. She thought someone had broken in and was still inside. So when she opened the door and saw a dark figure crouched near her kitchen counter, she went into full panic mode. We both stood there for a while, her shaking, me apologizing nonstop. I felt awful. The whole thing that was supposed to make her feel loved ended up terrifying her instead. After things calmed down, she sat on the couch and took a few deep breaths. I blew out the candles, turned the lights back on, and cleaned up the mess I'd made trying to dodge that frying pan. The food was cold by then, but we still sat down and ate it, quietly, awkwardly, not really looking each other in the eye. Every once in a while, one of us would start to chuckle just from how ridiculous it all was. Like, I really thought I was being romantic, but instead I created a full-blown horror movie scene. Later that night, she finally managed to laugh for real and said, "Next time you want to surprise me, maybe just bring flowers. Or text me first. Don't sneak into my apartment like some kind of candlelight burglar." Fair enough. I apologized about 100 more times and promised I'd never do something like that again. It was one of those moments where you realize that surprises can mean very different things depending on the situation. Looking back, I can't help but laugh a little at the image of her standing there in her doorway, wielding a frying pan like a medieval knight. But in the moment, I've never been so scared in my life. At least now it's one of those stories we can tell later. The time I tried to surprise her with dinner and nearly got knocked out for it. That's where the story ends. This one shows how good intentions can go wildly off track. It's kind of funny looking back, but in the moment, that must have been absolute chaos. The mix-up between romantic gesture and breaking and entering panic is something straight out of a sitcom. It's a reminder that sometimes the best surprises are the ones that don't involve hiding in the dark. This next story is about a man who had an unforgettable encounter with a drunk stranger, one that turned awkward fast when the stranger discovered his real name. A few years back, during the first wave of vaccine rollouts, I had one of the strangest experiences of my life. For context, my father was born in Morocco. which means I've got an Arabic sounding last name. But in terms of looks, I just pass as a regular white guy, maybe with a few subtle Mediterranean features if you look closely enough. At that time, I qualified early for the vaccine because of my weight. I remember going to this big clinic that had been set up for priority appointments. The lobby was full of people waiting, nurses and staff walking around, most of them masked, everyone keeping their distance. The atmosphere was calm but had that weird mix of tension and relief people had during that time. I checked in, showed my ID and social security card, then sat down to wait my turn. A few seats away from me, there was this guy, maybe in his 50s, clearly drunk, and not even trying to hide it. He had that red-faced, swaying look people get when they've been drinking for hours. At first he was just muttering to himself, but after a minute he started getting louder. He was ranting about how the country wasn't the same anymore, and how you couldn't trust anyone these days. It was the kind of rambling that made everyone else in the waiting room shift uncomfortably and pretend to look at their phones. Then, for some reason, he decided I was his new best friend. He leaned over, put his arm around my shoulder, and started talking like we were lifelong buddies. "You and me," he slurred, shaking me a little too hard. "We gotta stick together, man. You see what's happening? They're trying to replace us." I just sat there frozen, trying to nod politely while internally screaming. I didn't want to start anything, but I also didn't want to engage. The guy reeked of alcohol and was clearly on some kind of tirade. Then, in the middle of his rambling, my ID slipped out of my hand and fell to the floor. I reached for it, but he was faster, or maybe just more determined. "I got you, buddy," he said, bending down and picking it up before I could stop him. And that's when everything changed. He looked at my ID, squinted, and then read my last name out loud. It was like watching a cartoon character short circuit. His face went from drunk and smug to completely stunned. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then he just stared at me, wide-eyed, like I had personally betrayed his entire worldview. Right at that moment, one of the nurses called my name. I reached out, took my ID from his hand, and stood up to go. I gave a quick, polite thanks, trying not to laugh at the look on his face. But as I walked away, I heard him shout, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear, "You betrayed me!" I didn't even turn around. I just kept walking straight into the vaccination room while everyone else tried not to laugh. Inside, the nurse asked if I was okay, and I just said, "Yeah, just long story." But deep down, I couldn't stop smiling. It was such a bizarre moment, like I'd been undercover and my secret identity had been exposed. Even now, I think about it sometimes. The sheer drama of that man yelling, "You betrayed me," like I was some character in a historical epic, over an ID card. I couldn't have scripted it better if I tried. That's where the story ends. It's crazy how some people can flip from friendly to furious in an instant. The whole thing sounds like a scene straight out of a dark comedy. Serious topic, but absurd delivery. The drunk guy probably thought he'd found an ally and ended up face to face with his own ignorance. The funniest part is how dramatic that one line sounded, like it belonged in a movie instead of a vaccination clinic. This next story is about someone grieving their late boyfriend who had a precious, one-of-a-kind gift, until a careless friend completely disrespected it. When my boyfriend passed away about a year ago, one of the things he left me was a custom copy of The Song of Achilles. It wasn't just any edition, it was hand-painted by an artist on Etsy, signed by the author, and inside he had written a personal note just for me. It was the kind of gift that carried his handwriting, his thoughtfulness, and every time I looked at it, I felt close to him again. My friend Elle knew all of this. She knew how sentimental that book was to me, but for months she kept asking if she could borrow it. Every time I said no as gently as I could. I even suggested she buy her own copy, or maybe check it out from the library. She got upset and told me she couldn't afford it because she was unemployed, and she didn't want to deal with getting a library card since she didn't have a driver's license. Eventually, I gave in. I didn't want to seem rude or like I was gatekeeping something as simple as a book. Before I handed it over, I told her clearly that it meant a lot to me and that she needed to be really careful with it. She promised she would. A few weeks later, she handed it back, and the moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. The book was completely different. There was a faint coffee ring on the cover, like she'd used it as a coaster. When I opened it, I saw that she had written all over the pages in bright purple pen. I'm not talking about thoughtful literary notes or meaningful reflections. It was random doodles, underlines, and comments like, "This part reminds me of me and Jason Lalel." She'd even dog-eared several pages, bending them at sharp angles. I stood there in silence for a few seconds, trying to process what I was looking at. This was the last gift my boyfriend had ever given me, something he'd gone out of his way to make special. Now it looked like a cheap used book from a thrift shop. I finally told her she'd ruined it. She laughed like it was no big deal and said, "It's just a book." Then she went on to say she had actually made it more special because now it had notes from a friend and looked like it's actually been read. And then, this part really got me. She said my boyfriend would have loved how passionate she was about it, since he was studying for an English degree. That was when I snapped. I told her that was completely out of line and that I wanted her to replace it. I didn't even care about the money. I just wanted her to take responsibility, or at least acknowledge what she'd done. She got defensive and said I was being selfish. She claimed that I only wanted money and that the book was fine since it could still be read. I told her again that it wasn't about the money. It was about respect. Then she said something that really stung. She told me it wasn't even available anymore and that I needed to let it go. Later, I found out she'd been telling our mutual friends about the situation, and some of them took her side. They said I was overreacting, that I was projecting my grief onto a material thing. But that book wasn't just a thing, it was a memory. It was one of the few tangible pieces of him I still had. She never apologized. She never even tried to understand why it hurt so much. Every time I look at that book now, it's a mix of sadness and anger. What was once something deeply personal is now covered in someone else's handwriting. And maybe the hardest part is that it feels like another piece of him got taken away. Not by time, not by loss, but by carelessness. That story wraps up here. That friend completely missed the point of what that book meant. Some people just don't understand the emotional weight behind certain things, especially when they're tied to loss. What's wild is how she tried to justify it, like ruining something sentimental somehow made it better. It's the kind of situation that really shows who values empathy and who doesn't. This next story is about a customer who left an honest review for a rude restaurant owner and ended up serving a little revenge that hit harder than expected. So I've got this hobby where I like to review businesses, restaurants, shops, anything really. It started as something small, but over time it turned into a fun side passion. I've even gotten some nice perks from it, discounts, free desserts here and there, little things that make it worth it. One night, I decided to go out for dinner and use a discount voucher I had. It was one of those limited time deals that you buy ahead of time and redeem later, and this was literally the last day before it expired. I figured I might as well use it before it went to waste. When I got to the restaurant though, things just felt off right away. You know when you walk into a place and instantly get the vibe that you're not welcome? That's exactly how it felt. The staff barely looked up when I walked in, and no one came over to greet me for several minutes. I stood there awkwardly, waiting by the host stand, trying to make eye contact with someone. Anyone. Eventually, a woman came over and asked what I needed. I explained that I was there to dine in and that I wanted to use my voucher. She just stared at me like I'd said something confusing, then told me to hold on while she got someone else. A few moments later, the owner came out. She asked what the problem was, so I politely explained again that I had a valid voucher and wanted to use it before it expired. She immediately shook her head and said, "No, you can't use that anymore." I was confused. I pulled up the voucher on my phone, showed her the expiration date. Clear as day, it was still valid for that exact date. But she crossed her arms and said, "It's too late. We're not honoring that." I stayed calm and said, "Okay, that's fine. If you're not honoring it, I'll just request a refund from the voucher company." I wasn't rude about it. I was ready to just leave and move on. But she didn't drop it. She kept talking, complaining about how these voucher deals attract the wrong kind of customers and how people try to cheat the system. At that point, I decided to leave. It wasn't worth arguing. Later that night, I wrote an honest review about what happened. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated. I just described how I was treated, how the voucher was refused even though it was still valid, and how the owner handled it. A day later, I got a message. It was from her, the owner, and she was furious. She was calling me names, cursing me out, and saying I was trying to ruin her business. I responded calmly, telling her that my review was factual and based on my personal experience. I reminded her that if she didn't want people using vouchers, she shouldn't participate in programs that offer them. Then she said something that took it to a whole new level. She made a racist remark, targeting a specific group of people, and told me I should be happy going to other restaurants where that group works in the back. I just sat there staring at the message, shocked. It was such an ugly, unnecessary thing to say. So, I decided to let her words speak for themselves. I took screenshots of the messages, every single one, and added them under my original review. I captioned it with something simple like, "Owner's direct messages to me after my review." And that was that. The next day, the messages stopped. She never reached out again. But the best part? Her business is located in a neighborhood largely made up of the exact group she insulted. So when people in the area saw those screenshots, they were not happy. The comments section on her business page lit up fast, and I noticed her ratings started dropping pretty quickly. It's been a while now, and last time I checked, those screenshots are still there, plain as day. She probably regrets ever hitting send on those messages. Sometimes you don't need to yell or argue. Just letting someone's own words do the talking is enough. That's the end of this story. It's amazing how some people can completely destroy their own reputation with just a few angry messages. The owner could have just let it go and moved on, but instead she made it a whole lot worse for herself. The reviewer didn't even have to exaggerate anything. The screenshots said it all. It's a reminder that how you treat people online matters just as much as how you treat them in person. This next story is about a dad who realizes how much distance had quietly built up between him and his teenage son, all because of one simple request. My son is 14 years old, and I'm his dad. Yesterday, I was sitting on the couch watching some TV. Nothing special, just a quiet evening. After a while, my son came into the room and sat down next to me. Not just beside me, but right up close. It actually caught me a little off guard. I looked over and asked, "What's up?" He said, "Nothing." So I figured he just wanted to hang out. But then, after a few moments of silence, he said something that kind of stopped me in my tracks. He said, "I guess I was wondering if maybe I could get a hug." I turned to him and said, "Sure. Why do you ask?" It wasn't meant to sound cold or anything. I was just curious. He hesitated for a second and then said, "I don't know. I guess you never really hug me anymore." That one sentence hit me harder than I expected. I didn't even realize it had been that long since I'd hugged him. I just nodded and pulled him in for a hug. It lasted longer than I thought it would, and honestly, it felt a little awkward at first. Not because I didn't love him, but because it had been so long that I didn't know how to act in that moment. My brain was overthinking it, even as I was holding my own kid. When we let go, I noticed he had a tear on his cheek. I asked him what was wrong. He quickly wiped it away and said, "Nothing. It just felt nice. I'm sorry." I told him there was nothing to be sorry for, and I asked if he wanted to sit with me for a bit. He said, "Okay," and sat right next to me again. I put my arm around him, and we just watched TV together in silence. At first I felt tense, maybe because it was unfamiliar, maybe because I felt guilty. But after a while, I started to relax. The longer we sat there, the more natural it felt. The next morning, when he came into the kitchen, I walked up and gave him a hug. He kind of smiled and said, "It's okay. You don't have to hug me all the time or anything." I told him, "I want to." And this time, when he hugged me back, it didn't feel awkward at all. Afterward, though, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying that first moment, him asking for a hug like it was some big favor. The fact that he even had to ask made me realize how much I'd let slip through the cracks. Somewhere along the line, I stopped showing affection the way I used to. Maybe it happened gradually as he got older. Or maybe I convinced myself that teenagers didn't want that kind of closeness anymore. But the truth is, I was wrong. My kid still needs his dad to show that kind of love, even if he's taller now or more independent. That hug, as small as it seemed, said a lot more than either of us put into words. Now I'm trying to make sure it doesn't take another request for something as simple as a hug. That's where this story ends. It's crazy how a simple moment like that can say so much about growing up and parenting. You can feel the love there, but also how easy it is to drift into habits without realizing it. The dad clearly cares. He just forgot how to show it in the way his son needed. It's a quiet reminder that affection doesn't stop being important just because someone gets older. This next story is about someone who tried to play it cool during a routine traffic stop, but ended up acting so nervous the cop probably thought they were hiding something big. So there I was, driving home one night, just minding my business, when I saw those familiar red and blue lights flash in my rearview mirror. You know that instant wave of panic that hits even if you've done absolutely nothing wrong? Yeah, that one. My stomach dropped, and I pulled over immediately, doing my best to look like the most law-abiding citizen on the planet. Hands perfectly placed at 10 and 2, posture straight, eyes forward. The officer walks up to the car, flashlight already in hand, and says the usual, "License and registration, please." Easy enough, right? Except that's when everything started to go downhill. Fast. I reached over to the glove box to grab my registration, but in the process, my elbow bumped my sunglasses right off my face. They hit the steering wheel, bounced off the door, and landed somewhere in the passenger footwell. Without thinking, I leaned over to grab them. Big mistake. From the officer's perspective, I'm now bent over, reaching into the dark part of my car, which, let's be real, probably looks exactly like the start of one of those bad traffic stop videos. The officer's flashlight immediately clicked on and shined right through the window, like a scene from a crime drama. I froze mid-reach, my sunglasses still on the floor, realizing just how suspicious that must have looked. Panicking, I straightened up way too fast and started over-explaining, because apparently that's my coping mechanism. I blurted out, "Sorry, officer, I just dropped my sunglasses. They're a prescription, not drugs. I mean, obviously not drugs, they're glasses, haha." Yeah, I actually said that. The look he gave me could only be described as pure confusion mixed with disappointment. It was the kind of look that said, "I didn't think this traffic stop would be eventful, but now I'm rethinking everything." I fumbled through the glove box, trying to find my registration, but my hands were shaking like I just had 6 cups of coffee. When I finally found it, I grabbed my license from my wallet. Except when I tried to hand it over, it slipped right out of my hand and kind of flew, like a tiny plastic frisbee. It landed halfway out the window, awkwardly wedged in the door frame. I froze again. The officer just sighed, slowly reached out and took it from where it was dangling. For a second, he didn't even say anything, just looked at me with that calm, professional patience that probably comes from dealing with people like me all day long. Finally, he broke the silence and said, "Sir, your taillight is out. Get it fixed." That was it. No ticket, no lecture, just that one sentence. I nodded so fast it probably looked like I was trying to break a world record. "Yes, sir. I'll fix it first thing tomorrow morning. Thank you. Have a great night." He handed my stuff back, gave me one last look, the kind that said he was trying to figure out if I was nervous, guilty, or just incredibly weird, and walked back to his car. I sat there for a moment, heart pounding, trying to process what just happened. I'd gotten pulled over for something as small as a broken taillight, and managed to act like a full-on suspect in a crime drama. When I finally drove off, I couldn't help but laugh at myself, out loud, like a maniac. Because really, who panics that hard over a traffic stop? I didn't even do anything wrong, unless you count performing the most unconvincing "I'm totally chill" act ever seen on the side of a highway. Looking back now, the whole thing feels like a bad audition for one of those undercover cop shows. Except I was the one making myself look guilty. Next time I'm keeping my hands still, my sunglasses wherever they fall, and my mouth completely shut. That story wraps up here. It's kind of hilarious how panic can turn the simplest situation into total chaos. The guy literally did everything right, and still looked guilty just because he overthought it. It's the most relatable kind of embarrassing, because we've all had that moment where trying to seem calm just makes us look even weirder. Sometimes staying still really is the best move. Anyways, that's gonna wrap it up for today's stories. Hopefully it made for a nice, easy listen. If you had a good time, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Thanks for spending some time here, and I'll catch you in the next one.